Okay, there works. Okay, hi. Okay, so today, being that it was just Lag BaOmer, which is sort of a minor holiday, one that we're not as familiar about. We're familiar with the bonfires, obviously. Oh, hold on 1 second, we're just going to wait. Are those people coming here? If they are, that's fantastic. If they're not, no, yes, no, they're curving left. Okay, not. Okay, all right. What? Yeah, so we can close the door. Yeah, sure, of course. Okay, so so we're gonna get going. Okay, so being that it's Lag BaOmer, sometimes the things in life that are the least, they seem like they're the least important, very often are massively important. They're more hidden. The hidden things are usually, just like, for example, certain discussions. If you hear people talking about everything, you watch the news. Oh, the discussions, it's so important. You know what? Whatever you're hearing on the news is not where the important discussions are happening. Where they're happening is behind closed doors. They're more hidden. They're more private. So in life, we can naturally intuit the fact that things that like everybody knows are important, but the real sort of, I wouldn't call it the mystery, the real important stuff is usually what's called samay min ahayin, hidden from the eye. That's stuff you don't really see. But obviously that's a place which is really important to get to. So without going into a lot of detail, that Lag BaOmer is all about that. Lag BaOmer is about, the hidden aspect of our traditions and understanding. For the simple sort of background, it's the reason why it's a significant day is it's the yahrzeit of somebody by the name of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a Tana about 2,000 years ago. A Tana is one of our ancient sages, and in a certain time period they were called Tanaim as opposed to rabbis. And he was known that as he was passing away, long stories, happy to discuss about that, living in a cave. You think COVID was tough, he was 10 years in a cave, just him and his son, like what? But anyhow, what happened after that, and before he passed away, was what's called like revealing a tremendous amount of hidden wisdom. Why then, why whatever, none of that's really important for now, but it's all really important. But we're going to try to glean something from that that's also extremely relevant for us, because the more important the conversation is, it's not the less relevant it is, it should be more important. That's why there's such important conversations to have. That's also why, on a side, to interrupt myself, which I have the permission to do, because I don't mind, is that's often why people don't actually go ahead and have those important conversations, because they know the important conversations actually have impact. So they stay away from them. They stay on the high level conversations, which really like, oh yeah, that's kind of nice, whatever that. Okay, let's come back and we'll talk about it more. The real core of the conversations, those are the ones that make the biggest difference. So we're going to talk a little bit about Lag BaOmer. If you remember, there was a title which I took off there in case you don't remember, so I don't give away any of the pieces. But does anybody know who the individual is that happens to be in this picture on the top? That's our first source. We'll use pictures as sources sometimes as well. It keeps me personally more interested than reading lots of text. Anybody recognize the guy? Yes? Incorrect. Good guess though, because he's a golfer, and I don't even know any other golfers between him and Tiger Woods, and clearly he's not Tiger Woods. That's not like an inappropriate thing to say, but it's clearly not Tiger Woods. I mean that, wherever you are. Right? Arnold Palmer, also a famous one. So this guy happens to be Ben. Nope, you're wrong. Sorry. I don't mean to hurt your feelings, and it's not like everybody's right. It depends on your opinion. You're just wrong. It's not who it is. This is a person by the name of Charles Boswell. Charles Boswell was Charles Boswell growing up was a great athlete. He got recruited by Alabama. I think he played on baseball. He's a football and baseball player. In 1941, he was recruited by the Army, obviously during the war. He became a captain. He moved up the ranks. Unfortunately, what happened in his tour of service is he was going to rescue one of his buddies in a burning tank, and he lost all sight. He lost his vision completely. So obviously he was discharged, he came back, and he's like, what am I going to do? But he's an athlete. So he decided to take up a sport that he never did before. He took up golf, of all sports, right? So he took up golf, and he actually rose up in the ranks of golf. There's a whole, as you would imagine, a blind golf network and competition. He won like 10 or 11 championships here, internationally he won. He was tearing it up in the golf world. It's before many of us were born, so it makes sense we don't know who he is. And I had to find a picture where you couldn't necessarily tell that he was. But Charles Boswell also won the Ben Hogan Award. Anybody know who Ben Hogan is? Ben Hogan was also an amazing championship player. And to get his award was a big thing, and that was always Charles's idol. So at the Ben Hogan Award, he met Ben Hogan. He's talking to him, and he goes over to Ben, and he says, "Ben, I would love to play a game of golf with you. Can we play together?" Of course, Charles says to Ben, and Ben's like, well, of course, listen, it would be an honor. I'm sure he was genuinely impressed with, anyone who appreciates the sport and sees somebody who's able to do it in that. He says, he's about to respond, say absolutely, no problem. And before he's able to say, of course it would be an honor, he says, for money. Can we play for money, says Charles. And he's like, what? He says, as good as Charles was, again, his blind golfing championships wasn't on the level of where Ben Hogan was, because he had a little bit of an extra. So he's like, hey, it won't be fair, whatever. He says, no, $1,000 a hole. Back then in the 50s, that was like, I don't know, you could maybe afford a garage in our days for that, right? So it was a lot of money, in other words, because garages cost a lot of money in this day and age. So he's like, listen, you can't, and this, that, whatever. He's like, oh, what's the matter? You chicken? You won't play with me, whatever? He said, listen, fine. He says, but I'm telling you right now, if I play against you and we're playing for money, like, there's no mercy rule, like I'm playing you, I'm trying. He says, yeah, that's what I want. So he says, okay, you're on. He says, you name the place, you name the time. He says, we're going to play right here, and I'll meet you here back tomorrow, 11 o'clock. PM.
Equaling out the advantage.
Equaling out the advantage, right? Right? Assuming there weren't any lights that are around there. So what's the humor, the message, the idea? Where does your mind go with a story like that, of the blind golfer challenging whatever? If you just heard that story, and after you giggled and you said, you know what, you were forced to sort of extract something from it, because we learn from everything. We learn from humor, we learn from stories, we learn from people, we learn from reality, we learn from text. Everything's a lesson waiting to be learned. So what would you say, right? If you're sitting around the table with your friend and they said, oh, interesting story, what do you take away? Yeah?
I just think so that graphic that's everyone probably remember about equality and equity, where it shows the differences, and things might look the same, but then you get people on the same level, with someone standing on the box and all this, and they can both see exactly the same, where before it's...
Fantastic, right? So sometimes we can take in that story, right? Beautiful, I didn't think of that myself, so thank you. Is that, like, from that story alone, you can learn, like, so many times when we're trying to assess things or judge things, personally or organization, whatever, we're like, oh, well, it's not apples to apples. If you saw them in their picture on the golf course, it'd be apples to apples. Then you find out one little detail, and it's not apples to apples. It's like, it's the biggest extreme opposite you can possibly have. Yeah?
I was thinking that you think that Ben Hogan has the advantage, you cited, right? But just a little tiny detail at a time switches the advantage around.
Wow, right? Think about that, right? You look in this situation and say, oh, who's the one who's got the advantage? Well, of course, the guy who can see and it's light outside, he's got the advantage. And all of a sudden, well, you know what? The guy who's living in darkness and is able to navigate darkness. And how much of life is full of light? How much of life is full of darkness? Who's the stronger person to navigate? Beautiful, beautiful. Anything else?
There's a real underestimating of capability at the beginning of the story. I find when you talk with people with a disability, there's a real underestimation of what people can and cannot do. And it seems that that's what Ben Hogan was doing too at the beginning of the story.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, right? You sometimes underestimate the power of what a person can't do with something, right? We've all seen those stories that we're inspired by. There's a good friend of mine who happens to be, I can't call him a good friend of mine. He's sort of a good friend of mine. He was a good friend of mine 30 years ago. If I saw him again, I'm sure we'd be good friends again. Levi Greenspan. He happens to be blind. He went blind when he was in his 20s. I'll tell you a funny story. It was a little embarrassing, but it was a funny story, so I'll share it. But anyhow, he became blind in his 20s, and after that, he finished law school. He finished the rabbinic ordination. He recently, as of last year, this is ages ago, he recently got married. Just last year, he got married. And he's the kind of person that would go around and speak in places, and you'd walk away being like, look at what he's doing and look what I'm doing. You realize what that is. So here's I apologize to waste our time with the story, but it's funny. So we were in Israel. My wife and I, we got married. We went for our first year. We went to take a year off in Israel. So we're there, and Levi was coming to town because he was doing a speaker circuit over there. So, and Levi would have to travel with somebody who was Ohad at the time. I believe his name, Ehud, actually. And we hadn't seen each other in a while since we got married. And we were in Mea Sharim, which is, if you've ever been there, it's like an ultra-Orthodox area. We were there on Friday, Erev Shabbat. So that's where you buy a lot of stuff. So you put ultra-Orthodox, Erev Shabbat, small streets together. It's like chaos, right? And so I'm walking down there getting some last-minute stuff, and all of a sudden I see Levi and Ehud. And I walk up to Levi, who I was so excited to see, and I give him a big hug. I'm like, Levi, and he was eating by us Friday night. He was going to be eating us Friday night, but I saw him. Levi, it's so great to see you. And he whispers in my ear the following words. He goes, B'sha Tova. And what does B'sha Tova mean? B'sha Tova means in good time. It's the blessing that we give people when they're expecting a child. We don't say Mazel Tov because, as we know, there's so many, it's a miracle that babies turn out the way that they turn out. It's a miracle that you can see. So many miracles. So you don't say Mazel Tov because that's like an ayin hara, an evil eye a little bit. You say B'sha Tova, everything should be in good time. Good time. So he whispers that to me. So why is that so weird? Because honestly, like that week, my wife and I found out that we were expecting our first child, right? Who's now 22. This is how long ago the story is, right? So, and why was that crazy? Because I didn't know this, but like, because I just was clueless. Like, when you first find out that you're expecting, you don't tell anybody. Like, you don't even tell your parents. Like, I'm like, we're gonna tell everyone. There wasn't Facebook, but I'm like, oh, well, like, put on a tree somewhere so everyone knows we're expecting. Like, you don't tell anybody until we pass that third month. Blah, blah, blah. So no one in the world knows except for me, my wife, and that little, like, test that you buy for whatever, like, step 1 or step 2, whatever it's called. I don't know. That's all. I'm like, Levi. So I go, like, so my mind's like running. You hear all these things, like if you lose one sense, like, other senses are heightened. I'm like, but it's not even me, it's my wife that's pregnant. So I can't like sense pregnant. Like, I come home, like, Shira, I'm like, you don't understand what happened. She's like, who'd you tell? I'm like, I promise not to tell anyone. I promise. She's like, you misheard, whatever. I don't know. Like, maybe he really is this like deeply. So anyhow, he's out at night. He comes back, and we're sitting in our living room in our apartment in Jerusalem on Rehov Haran, and I'm like, Levi, it was great to see you late today. He's like, yeah, Rob, great to see you. I'm like, yeah, and I gave you a hug. You gave me a hug. I'm like, yeah. I said, like, Levi, do you remember what you said to me? And my wife's like leaning into like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, of course. What'd you say? B'shah tova. I'm like, Levi, why'd you say that? I'm expecting maybe. He says, Lipner, be honest, I haven't seen you in about a half a year. You must have put on like 20 pounds. What are you expecting or something like that? So I think this guy's like a prophet and he's calling me fatso right to my face. That's the whole story of Levi, right? So alas, I digress. But right, so Levi, however, is a special character, special guy, right? And he's done so much. So going back to your point.
So are you for sharing that story?
Yeah, I can tell you, lots of stories. The one day I decided to record the fakakta thing. Okay. So back to, so your point, sometimes people who have these things, we underestimate the power of what they can achieve. Okay, all great messages. Each one, we could go down a huge, I wouldn't call it a rabbit hole, a huge mountain of wisdom with each one of those. Any other one before? Okay, so I'd like to present one also. Not better, actually, than the ones that you said. Some of the ones you said I thought a little bit. Other ones you said I'd never even thought of, and I think they're all very true and real. But if you think about the simple side of the story, without trying to sort of like, say, oh, well, maybe, like the simple side of the story is that when there's light, I mean, it's easier to golf, right? I mean, if you have a certain skill set that you want to do, right? It's always easier to do it if there's illumination and light, right? Light represents, obviously, light. Light represents in Jewish wisdom, like goodness, right? If we're around a team of people working on stuff and there's a lot of anger or distrust or, God forbid, hatred, it's very hard to work together, right? If you're in a space, like if there's health issues, it's hard to work together, right? It doesn't mean they can't, and there's a reason for those pieces and you grow another time. But we'd all agree that when we're in a place of light, of joy versus upset, it's always easier, right? And in many ways, this whole holiday of Lag Bomer, which is a day where we light these huge bonfires. In fact, Sarah Lefton tells a funny story. She told me a bunch of months ago that she was taking a tour through Israel, and she looked around and they were traveling, and there were like fires going on everywhere. She was like freaking out. She's taking like this mission of people, and like it looks like Israel's under fire. She just didn't know it was Lag Bomer. Like there was just a bunch of people lighting fires. It looked like Jerusalem was on fire. And she's like calling like whoever, I don't know, they call over there to do whatever. She's like, we're under attack. They're like, it's just Lag Bomer, right? So there's lots of fires being lit. That's what it is, right? In fact, between us, I took a day. I was not here. The reason why we're not learning Monday, because we're learning Tuesday, I traveled to New York to be with one of my rebbeim, Reb Moshe Weinberger, who had a whole thing around this to teach some ideas. It must have been 2,000 people. It was unbelievable, right? So light helps a lot. So let's try to unpack that a little bit in a very relevant way, even further. So if you look at the next source, right, everything starts in the beginning, right? Even the book itself starts in the beginning, right? That's where it starts, right? So if you read this story of creation, right, which obviously when you're creating something, right, anything that we create, the beginning of the creation process is important. Right, so if we're going to be making a call or whatever, like what's the message we want to give? If we're going to be interacting, you always go in like, okay, what are we looking to do? So the World Project isn't different. We don't like. I'm sure they didn't just say, hey, let's build a building. We'll figure out what happens next door after we build it. They said, what do we really want it to achieve? And they built it with that in mind so you can understand it. So when we get to the beginning of Genesis, the creation of our world, right? If you go through the first 3 sentences, if anybody wants to read it, I'll read it in Hebrew, someone can read it in English afterwards. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz, va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, v'choshech al pnei tom, v'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim, v'yomer Elokim yihi or v'yihi or. Who wants to be our English reader? Yeah, thanks, Lauren.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water.
Okay, stop right there. So what did we learn from the first, let's say, like sentence? What do we know so far about the unfolding story? If it's never been read before and you'd never gone to a hotel room and opened up the drawer and looked in the book that's inside of there, right? What do you know so far just from the first sentence or two?
That God created the heaven and the earth.
Okay, so that's now go to second sentence. So what does that mean, the created heaven and earth? What's out there in verse 2? It's a little hard to understand all the words. I'm not saying that, I mean that seriously. What do they really mean? Okay.
It was weighted with darkness.
Right? So think about that. The world was created, and there was just a lot of darkness. Right? There's a lot of darkness. So if you ask somebody who's growing up in day school, they might say, what did God create on the first day? So they'll say light and dark. And what do they mean? There's light and there's dark. The world's created. It doesn't even say God created. It said, and the world was full of darkness. And then what's the first thing, Vayomer, that God said, let? What's the line? Okay, you continue, Lauren. And God said?
God said, let there be light, and there was light.
Right? So the beginning, the DNA of it is there was a world. The world had darkness. Right? Darkness means a lot of things. It means it pulls out strength that you otherwise wouldn't have, so maybe that's why it had to be there. It pulls out the understanding of, wait, there is a lot of darkness in the world. And it pulls out the fact that really we're not supposed to be living our lives in the dark. Right? So God can just say, hey, great dark world, no problem. I'm going to call it a day right there. Right after that, he says, let there be light. And so what's that saying? So our deeper sources say that the goal of life, right? We know we're supposed to act, we're supposed to imitate God, we're supposed to be like God-like figures in this world, right? There's a lot of darkness. And God said, if anyone wants to say something, our job is to bring light into this world, right? Because no one operates well out of darkness, right? So when we speak about phrases, right, this should trigger a whole bunch of things in our mind. A light unto the nations, what does that mean, right? What does it mean that when we speak about things like, oh, it feels so light, why is even that, what does it mean, the light? But we know that that's our job. What we're all doing here, right, is we're trying to spread the light. That's what we're trying to do because there's darkness in the world. So what do you do in order to spread the light, right? What has to happen? How do you achieve that? So there's a beautiful phrase that's brought down by the Baal Tanya, the first of one of the Talmidim, the students of the Baal Shem Tov, who you might have heard, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement. He had a student, right? And then Chabad comes eventually from there as well. So there's a line, a very famous line. In English, it's so beautiful, right? A little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. See, what's interesting about light, right? So the world is dark, a lot of darkness, and then what happens? This little ball of fire called the sun. It's not so little, but when you look up in the sky, it's pretty little, right? And somehow, everything is light, right? That sometimes all you need is to give a little bit of illumination, light a little bit of a fire onto something, and all of a sudden everything can change in an instant. Right? And this idea, again, we'll just give sort of applications for us to take. This works in community, right? There's darkness, a little bit of light can make a massive difference. We've all, I'm sure, experienced that in different ways. It works in relationships. Relationships have darkness. Usually we stay away from darkness. Our goal is to add light into that. So if there's a relationship, we add light into that. With our own selves, there's a lot of dark places inside of each and every one of us, right? For sure. I'm totally cool, because I was in the airport, so you have to go through one of those things where you stand and they body scan you. You can scan my body, no problem. My soul, I'm a little bit more nervous about that. There's a lot more dark, I'm carrying a lot more baggage on my soul side, my personality side, than I am on my, carry-on. I'm okay with that, right? So, but what's my job? Not to say, hey, that's what it is, right? And there's a reason why it's there, no, all these other reasons, but the goal is, how do I infuse a little bit of light into that? And that really, so the blind golfer, the idea of light, of bringing that in, right? And just how much does it need? Not that much. That's why I followed up and asked Jeff that question without realizing. I think it's like this. If you could just add one thing to the community that would be different tomorrow, and he sort of said that little change today would actually be massive in 10 years from now, right? It just sets a whole different trajectory. So if we take it one step further, just being conscious of time, if we take it one step further, right? So that again, we're not going into what those, that anybody familiar with what that image is on the source sheet? Those little circles and it's a symbol that's often related to Kabbalah, right? It's called the spheros. Spheros, we're not going to go into that now. Maybe in about 17 years we'll get there, right? But spheros is like, how does God bring like that kind of stuff down into the practical, little normal everyday world, right? Not for now, not for now. But the word Kabbalah, right? In Hebrew, what does that word mean, right? Anybody want to receive? The art of receptivity, likabel, right? To receive. Means there's a lot of stuff out there, but I've got to find a way to be able to hold on to something. Because if I can't grab it, if I don't have a cup for it, if I can't actually bring it into something, they can be nice ideas, they're floating all over, but how do I become a master at receiving just a little bit of light that can infuse and illuminate everything that's going on? Right? And that's our job, to get these little sources of inspiration, of light, of ideas, which can transform. Oh, but there's so much to do out there. Our job is just to come up with a little bit. And that little bit. So this whole idea of what one of the many ideas that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was speaking about thousands of years ago in terms of the deeper sources of stuff, in the darkest of places, the greatest of light can come out. And he illuminated that light. And he said our job on these days is to pull that out from our wisdom, because there's a lot more depth than just sort of the surface level, words that we're all familiar with. There's a depth there. There's real light and power inside of that if you dig deeper in there, right? And so too in the way that we interact in this world also. So I'll end with, just because conscious of the 12:30 limit, I'll end with the story of a button, which I think is just a beautiful idea. So if I shared this story, you'll stop me. I don't think I did. But once upon a time, there was a person who was traveling. So we're in the world. It's funny. So some people say they're attending. They don't attend. I don't know why. I'm not sure. But a couple people I saw, I'm like, oh, it was people on the fundraising. They're coming because I said something about fundraising and stuff. They're just like, oh, I want whatever. So this is, maybe I'll send them the video if they can make it. So there's a story of a person who's collecting. He's collecting for a cause out in the old country over the ocean. He comes over to America, and he's going to see this person who's this very famous person. Back in the day, everyone was in what's called the shmata business. Shmata business means they were just, I don't know, how do you, like textiles. And it's funny, for the longest time in my life, I thought textiles meant tiles. I'm like, we were in the tile business? I never knew that. So for those who are too embarrassed to say they were like me for the first 40 years of my life, it means like clothing and fabric and stuff like that. So he was in the fabric business. He was a custom tailor. He was a very famous custom tailor. I don't know who you could equate it to today, but he was like top. And apparently he did very well. So, but unfortunately, what was known about him was that he wasn't a sharer. He didn't share. He didn't give. That wasn't right. And that's often a challenge, right? People have, and they like their state of live in the eye belongs to me. They don't realize. So the guy comes in, and before he even gets there, he says, "Tell the guy whatever he is, the rabbi, I don't know who's collecting, not interested." The guy's like, "I just want to speak to him." He says, "No." He says, "Listen, he traveled all the way over here from the other side of that's that." He says, "Listen, tell him to come in. I get 2 minutes, whatever." But trust me, the answer is no. This guy walks in. He says, "Oh, nice to meet you." Nice to meet you. He says, "Rab, no." Like, I'm sure you're busy. The answer is no. He says, you don't even know what I want. You don't even know what I want. He said, I know what you want. I know what all of you want. And like, the answer is no. Thank you very much for coming. Let me just ask my question. He says, fine, ask my question. So he goes down. He says, you see my jacket? I have a button. This button's falling off. It's loose. And I heard you are the best in the world at in the textile industry. And I was hoping that you'd be able to fix my button. Would you be able to do that? So what do you think he responds? He's like, that's your question? You want me to fix your button? Right? Last source on that's you're telling me you traveled all the way from like Poland over the thing, left your family. This is before TikTok or whatever else you do to keep in touch with whatever it is. Phones were, I don't even know if phones were attached to the wall. There might not have been phones. I'm not even sure. Right? You traveled, left your family, came here. You want me with all that I can do to fix a button? So he goes to me, says, why, that's weird, because you can do so much more. He says, let me ask you a question, right? When you were brought down into this world, and there was your soul, and God said you're needed, we spoke about the idea that we're here for a purpose. And he sent you all the way down here, and he says, I'm going to give you so much wealth, and so much power, and so much influence. He said, you think God sent you down in this world just to make some suits? That's it? When you can spread so much light and healing and help people so much with what you're doing. You came all the way down. He says, from over the ocean to here, I don't know, what does that take? A month of travel on a boat. He says, I don't know how high the heavens are, but wherever your soul came from, it was a much longer journey to come down into this little place for a short little time before you go back like I'm going back. And the biggest thing he can say is I was brought down to make a couple of suits. So once you realize that we're here to add light, that's the purpose of why we're here, in every interaction with others, in every goal that we set with our community, in every discussion that we have with ourselves even, the goal is how do we put more? The power to do that is so transformative. Oh, but there's so much. All we have to do is add a little bit of light. A little bit of light that uncovers turns into a massive bonfire. That's how bonfires start. You just light a little match, and somehow magically it turns into a bonfire. So as we go on this Lag BaOmer journey that's over, we have about 300 and some odd days to prepare for the next one. But it's funny because you walk down, and it's really the way it is with so much of our beautiful wisdom and tradition and values, right? What sometimes is just understood as somebody's like, said, oh yeah, that's the bonfire day. Like, there's so much more. So I challenge all of us to always see the depth and the light in everything, to see in everything that we're studying, the values can reach such a deep place. And at the end of the day, right, sometimes what we think is really about, this is our course, it's really about how do we spread light so that we're all able to do that as well. So anyhow, it was great. I have one small favor if possible.